Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. When Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the noisy crowd, he said, "Go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread throughout all that region. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning again. Last week, when we were talking about live, as we were going through live, love, learn, we asked the question, what type of life do you want to have? And so real briefly, as a part of that discussion, we mentioned the idea of, what you would do if you won the lottery or something like that. And we talked about that song where the guy wins $10 on a scratch-off ticket. Have any of you ever won anything kind of cool like that? Like, have you won a scratch-off ticket or won a raffle or anything like that? Laura, what did you win? Whoa. Wow. Awesome. Wow. Let's talk later. Yeah. Wow. That beats me. To be honest, I have terrible luck with that. Actually, I don't think I've ever won anything off of a scratch-off ticket. Not that I play that often. I never win raffles or anything like that. One time I have won something in a contest, and I brought it to show you today. It was actually kind of recently, and it was a contest on the internet, and without going into too much detail, it was kind of one of those things where you had to outlast the other people, and it was all just to win a free t-shirt. And so I got it, and so I brought it to show you today, because it is awesome in a sort of sarcastic sort of way. So it's actually a nice kind of one of those athletic dry fit shirts, so it's actually kind of a nice shirt. I do wear it all the time. But you're missing out on the best part. Do you want to see the best part? Is what's on the front. That's right. Like a boss, right here. And so this is the one thing I've won in a contest. And so when I wear it, indeed, I feel like a boss because I won it in an internet contest. If you're not familiar with the phrase "like a boss," it actually has its origins in this old Saturday Night Live skit, which I can't recommend. It's definitely not appropriate. But it's kind of taken on a life of its own, though, since then. And it's come to be an expression that means when you do something with sort of supreme confidence, and so that you really don't care what anyone else thinks or, even kind of what the rules or conventions of society are. And so if you go online, and again, you got to be careful because there's stuff that's not appropriate, but if you go online and you look, you'll find a lot of, funny pictures of people doing crazy stuff that'll then be captioned with "like a boss," So it'll have like a picture of some guy wearing just a completely ridiculous outfit, but wearing it boldly and not caring what anyone else thinks. And so it'll say "like a boss," or like, I saw one of a kid, it was a shot of him, and obviously it was a wedding, and the wedding cake, which had not been cut yet, the kid had walked up to it and just took a big scoop of cake right out of it, because that's what he wanted. And then it said "like a boss," right? Because that's how it is. That's supreme confidence. You don't care what anyone else thinks, what the rules are. You just do it like a boss. And so I find it interesting, though, that despite that we have this kind of thing, this phrase that's sort of taken off, that so often a boss is about the last thing that we feel like. That a lot of times, if you look at some of the things that we as people struggle with, a lot of times they are issues involving self-esteem. That a lot of times as we go through life, even those of us that may seem confident to other people, I think most of us would be willing to admit that there are definitely times, if not even the majority of the time, where we don't actually feel that confident, where we worry about what other people think of us. We worry about how capable we are, about how good we are, about what we're able to do, about our usefulness, about our worth, and about our value. We worry about that. And when we worry about that, it can affect a lot of stuff. It can affect our relationships. It can affect our jobs. It can affect really even who we identify ourselves as, like who we think we are. And so that's a little bit at the heart of the story that we read today, the gospel lesson. It's in Matthew chapter 9, if you want to turn there with me. Now, we read that whole section because it kind of all fits together. But really, we're only interested this morning in that middle part, in the sort of the story within a story here, which is the story of that woman. And that starts in verse 20. It's only a couple verses long. And it says, "Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, 'If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed.'" And this is a great story. There's so much stuff in there, and including some stuff I think we miss. You know, as modern people reading that story, I think we tend to think of it medically. And so clearly that was a serious issue. In fact, you have to imagine that back then, with their lack of medical knowledge and doctors and whatnot, that it was probably even life-threatening. And so we see it as a healing issue, as an issue of physical healing. And truly, that's amazing enough, right? That Jesus would heal her of this. But the story goes a little bit deeper than that. Because you see, back then, in the Mosaic law and the Jewish law, if you were a woman, and, sorry for talking about this, but it's just the reality. If you were a woman and it was that time of the month for you, you were considered ritually unclean during that time period. And so there was a lot of things that you could not do when you were ritually unclean. You could not go to worship. I mean, you could not go to the temple. You could not go to the synagogue, because the idea is if you're unclean, you can't go to a place or a person that's clean because you will basically contaminate it. And so during that period of time, you weren't supposed to have relations with your husband if you were married. You couldn't go around, anyone that had to remain clean. So like your rabbis, your priests, your prophets, your teachers of the law, the Pharisees, all of those people. None of them would want to be around you, because if they were around you, they would become unclean. And once they became unclean, they had to go through kind of an arduous process of ritually cleansing themselves so they could become clean again. This is actually a little bit some of the reasoning behind the story of the Good Samaritan. You remember that story? The guy's beat up and bloody and broken, lying on the side of the road. And two of the people that pass him by without helping are a priest and a Levite. Because if they stopped to help that guy, they would be made unclean. And so they had jobs to do. They couldn't afford to be unclean, and so they passed him by. And so it's the same thing for women when it was that time. You couldn't be around people because you would make them unclean. Now, that was only for a certain time every month. The rest of the time, you could be clean and you could do all those other things that everyone else could do. But think about what life was like for this woman, because she's been in this state constantly for 12 years. For 12 long years. She has been in a state where she is unclean. Where she's, we don't know if she was married, but if she wasn't supposed to have relations with her husband. She couldn't go to church. She couldn't worship. She couldn't have a relationship with her God, where no one was going to want to be around her because she was unclean, and by being around her, they would be made unclean. Can you imagine what that would do to you? That sense of isolation. 12 long years. Can you imagine what that would do to your psyche? What that would do to your self-esteem, your sense of worth, your sense of value? Being told over and over and over and over again that you're unclean and you can't be around us because we don't want to be unclean like you. How would that make you feel? And so it's no surprise that this woman desperately wants to be healed of this. She desperately wants to be healed of this. And she hears about Jesus who heals people. But she's going to run into the exact same problem that she runs into everywhere else. Jesus is a holy man. He's a rabbi. He's a teacher. He's a prophet. She thinks she knows. They're never going to let me near him. He's not going to want to be near me. He's not going to touch me or let me touch him because he'd be made unclean, and he can't afford that right now. He can't do that right now. He's a holy man. But she's so desperate that she thinks, if I'll just sneak up to him. There'll be this large crowd. No one will even know I'm there. I'll just sneak up to him in this crowd, and I'll reach out and I'll touch the hem of his robe. And that will be enough. I think we all share that desperation, that sense of need that she has when it comes to our need for being loved. When it comes to our need for fulfilling relationships with people. We all have that need. We're born with it as kids. And we grow up knowing that we need that love. And that's why when we didn't get that from our parents, it tends to affect us as adults. I mean, maybe you had a parent that didn't show a lot of love to you. It doesn't even mean they didn't love you. Some parents just came from an older generation where they didn't show that very much. But not showing it, you didn't know if it was there, and you didn't get that need for love fulfilled. And now you're grown, and it affects who you are. It affects how you feel about yourself. We desperately need love. And you can see it in our society because our culture is obsessed with love. In our culture, it's mostly romantic love. But I mean, you can go back you go back to the 70s and they had that game show, The Dating Game, And then now you look on TV and you've got like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette and Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire and like all these other shows. And I'll tell you like how deeply it has infiltrated everything is, so my wife and I, we don't watch a lot of live TV. We watch shows on Netflix. And my wife is a saint because she watches all the shows I want to watch, which tend to be like scary shows or superhero shows. And so obviously women are not super interested in those type of things. But she will patiently watch them with me and even pretends like she enjoys them. And so I wanted to reciprocate. And so there is a show that she likes to watch that I agreed to watch with her. And it is a show called Vampire Diaries. And I thought to myself, all right, I like vampires, They're like super strong and fast, and there's, vampire movies I've seen, there's a lot of action, I'll watch that show. Guys, Vampire Diaries is a soap opera about vampires. That's what it is. It is literally a show about vampires dating. That is what the show is about. And that shows how much our society is obsessed with that we've taken a character that throughout legend is a blood-sucking monster And we have turned that into a show about romance and relationships. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, and it, feeds into the whole thing, because now not only can you have the love that you need, but you can have it for thousands of years at a time. We need that love. We are desperate for that love. But as I was saying a minute ago, when we don't get it, it has a huge impact on us. When we feel like we are not worthy of love, either because we didn't get it when we were kids, or we haven't found a fulfilling like maybe it is romance, and you haven't found a fulfilling romantic relationship yet. Or maybe it's because you have some things that that you've done that are wrong, that you're not proud of. And you start to think to yourself, man, if anyone knew the real me, if anyone knew the things I'd done, there's no way they could love me. Man, if you don't feel worthy of love, if you don't feel like you deserve love, it can be hard to accept love. Even when someone comes to you and says, I love you and I care about you, your reaction is, no, you don't. Because why would you? Because I don't feel like I'm worthy of being loved. I don't feel like I deserve love. When you don't feel worthy, when you don't feel like you deserve something, it changes everything about you. Makes it even harder to love yourself. Imagine this woman, 12 years of being told she was unclean. Do you think in that 12 years she started to buy the hype? She started to believe, yeah, I'm unclean. I'm not worth it. I'm dirty. No one should be around me. And I'll tell you, when you can't accept love, and when you can't love yourself, guess what else you can't do? You can't love others. Because that affects who you are, and it affects how you act, and it affects the world around you. My wife was telling me about an experiment that she read about recently, about how self-esteem can sort of affect you. But that was at least part of it. And what they did was they took two groups of people, or they took a group of people and they split them into two groups. And they told them all that they were going to a job interview. And then they had a panel of people that were neutral. They didn't know anything about the experiment or all that. They were just told, you're going to interview these people, and we just want you to tell us if you would hire them or not. And so they split the people into two groups. And one group, before they went in for the interview, they took them into a room with a mirror, and they had them stand in front of the mirror and make like victory poses. Like standing real straight and tall and smiling, or like putting your hands up like you just won the race, like, yeah, I'm number one, they had them do that for like 2 minutes. It seems silly, but like right in the mirror, 2 minutes, yeah. Then the second group of people, before they came into the interview, they had them go do the same thing in the same room for 2 minutes. But these people, they had put their heads down and kind of fold their arms and just go like this for 2 minutes. And what they found was that all the people that did this for 2 minutes, the panel said they would have hired those people. And all the people that looked sad and did this, none of them would have got hired. How you feel about yourself affects your life, and it affects those around you, and it affects your ability to receive and give love. And that's how it was for this woman as she comes to Jesus. And then Jesus does something amazing. There's a twist to the story. And we all love movies with twists. I remember as a kid, I went to see Empire Strikes Back. Spoiler alert. Darth Vader is Luke's father. And that was such, we laugh about it now. It's become a cliche. But you got to realize at the time, like what a huge twist that was. That this character that they had built up into, this totally evil, murdering, villainous character who was literally faceless because he, wore this mask, who was inhuman. Is more machine than man. That's my terrible Obi-Wan accent there. This inhuman, faceless, evil character. That's what they built you up to expect. He was the bad guy. He was the villain of the movie. And what happens to the bad guy, the villain of the movie? He's defeated in the end, and everyone's happy. And then they flip everything. And not only do they reveal this inhuman, evil character as completely human, but he actually ends up being the dad of the hero of the movie. It totally flipped the script on what we were expecting out of that movie. Jesus is a guy who loves to flip the script on people. Because here is this woman, and she comes to him, and she is afraid. She's been told her whole life, you're unclean, and if you come around anyone else, you'll make them unclean. And she comes to Jesus, verse 22, and it says, Jesus turned and saw her. Take heart, daughter, he said, your faith has healed you. And the woman was healed at that moment. You see, Jesus flips the script. Jesus says, you think you're going to make me unclean because you're unclean. But the truth is, I'm going to make you clean because I'm clean. You think your uncleanness is going to contaminate me, but my cleanness is going to change and transform you. And so she's healed, and she's transformed, and she's made new. And when it comes to love, he does the same thing for us. He says, you might feel unworthy of love. You might feel like you don't deserve love. You might feel like you're not good enough to be loved. But I'll tell you, I love you, and that makes you good enough. I love you, and that makes you worthy. I love you, and that makes you deserving. Because the God of the universe loves us. The God of the universe, who by all logic shouldn't care about us at all, because we're so insignificant, cares enough to love each and every one of us, not just as a people, individually. He loves each and every one of us and has a personal relationship with us. And he loves us so much that he sent his son to die for us. And his son loves us so much that he was willing to die for us. Now I ask you, what does that say about your worth and your value and your self-esteem? We are incredibly valuable because God has deigned to love us. And when you realize that, guess what? Suddenly now, it doesn't seem so strange that someone else might love you. Now when someone else says, I love you and I care about you, we can accept that because we know God loves us and God cares about us. And we know we're worth being loved and worth being cared about. And when you know that, guess what else? You can love yourself. Yeah, we're not going to be perfect. Yes, there's always going to be things about ourselves we don't like, but we know that in Jesus Christ, we're changed. We know that in Jesus Christ, we're made new. We know that when he looks at us, he sees a righteous person covered in the blood of Christ. And so we can look at ourselves that way and see a good person and a lovable person. And when that happens, it frees us to love. When that happens, we feel like this guy now. And when we feel like this guy, then we don't care what other people think. We're confident we can go out and we can love other people because we know we're loved and we have that confidence. We can go out and care for other people, and we don't care what anyone might think. We don't care whether or not other people think that we're worthy of it or that we're good enough. We just trust and have that confidence, and so we can go out and we can love, right? Like a boss. In Jesus' name, amen.